Hello everyone and welcome to the latest instalment of this Roads to 9/11 series with Adam Fitzgerald. Today we're following on from the Afghan-Soviet War and looking at Pakistan's continued use of Islamic radicals to influence the various stands that came about in Central Asia after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Adam will focus in particularly on Azerbaijan, as it's an example of where Pakistani, British and US interests coincided in the use of extremist Islamists to facilitate a desired outcome in the political landscape of that country. He starts by addressing Afghanistan itself and Pakistan's support for the Taliban in the post-war period.
Well, after the Soviet War, Pakistan would try and work on having a formidable relationship with the Pashtun future of southern and eastern Afghanistan, and would have an asset in the struggle for post-NATO Afghanistan. But meanwhile, Pakistan will have almost a seemingly moderate relationship with the Taliban under Mullah Omar now. And the south of the country was in his grasp. They were fighting the Northern Alliance, which was backed by Ahmad Shah Massoud, whose nickname was the Lion of Panjshir. But over the last 10 years of the independence, the political divisions between among the Central Asian states hardened. Without Moscow to play like a role of arbiter, the borders would become like illogical, contested boundaries, fracturing, warring ethnic groups, rupturing trade and communication.
Okay, is this, just to say for the audience, this is because the Soviet Union has broken up into, I think, 18 republics now. So you've got all the stands have emerged across Central Asia.
Right. What was that? Yeah. Without the Soviet Union trying to moderate the issues now, what we're seeing is just almost as like this immediate rush for like control of the regions itself, and Pakistan itself was trying to influence where that direction goes. For example, like Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto ordered the Pakistan military to begin training hundreds and hundreds of Islamic militants in Afghanistan. I think what was happening was the underlying purpose was to use, I guess, the Islamist revolution in like Central Asia and reduce Russian influence or Russian power altogether in the region. And because even at that point when Russia was still recovering from their defeat, they were still a threat to these Arab nations. I mean, Pakistan is no weak link. I mean, but they still feared the influence of Russian nationalism itself. But Pakistan itself they would feel the effects of illicit trading. And it started with Gulbuddin Hekmatars, Hizb Islamiyah, trading weapons for cash, sometimes heroin, in order to back now the Taliban against the Northern Alliance, which he wouldn't do in the beginning, but he noticed the power structure of the Taliban. He knew that they were going to win, which was the only reason why he backed Mullah Omar itself. Now, Ahmad Shah Massoud would plead with like the world officials around during his trip to Spain, and he was asking for help. But they were supporting the Taliban and the Islamists in Tajikistan, since it was a key strategic area, twofold, against the recently defeated Soviet Union, Northern Alliance. Now, Tajikistan, by the way, was part of the Soviet Union, but now was under a civil war between the Tajik communists and the rising Islamic sector. I think that was obvious. And they were threatening the communists in the Soviet south of its borders. Now, Gulbuddin Hekmatar, Islamic Mujahideen, would be supporting the Tajik Muslims, but they were defeated in the war. But it wasn't a total loss, because another danger afforded to the Pakistanis regarding supporting the Islamists regarding Uzbekistan was the drug routes. That was so important, because the drug routes actually funded the black operations of the CIA, and of course the influence of Gulbuddin Hekmatar's Hizb Islamiyah, the political party itself. But Uzbekistan, very much like Tajikistan, was its routes through the countries like Afghanistan. The Soviets oftentimes had to use their broken military to fend off the smugglers, which were coming from many avenues, including Hekmatar's Hizb Islamiyya, the Haqqani network, which was an Afghan guerrilla insurgent group founded by Pahlavi Jalaluddin and his son Sirajuddin. They were an offshoot of the Taliban. And Pakistan was one of the first countries, by the way, to recognize the independence of Uzbekistan, and immediately became involved in the construction of their country because they saw that by using the influence of Pakistan's ISI and the politics to ward off any type of influence the Soviet Union had. And I mean, the most important was the funding of Islamic charities, which would be in turn set up illicit funding for the religious sector, who in turn fought against the socialist parties. And by the way, that's why when Pakistan opened up the madrasas, which led to this new religious defensive jihad, they started doing it in countries such as Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, which in turn would turn away any influence the Soviet Union would have.
Okay, so it was semi-successful in that we didn't end up with Islamic theocracies in these countries. I don't know if that was the ultimate goal, but at the same time, it diminished Soviet influence.
Right, I think that was the point. I think that they knew that the countries themselves wouldn't have any type of nationalist caliphate, if you will, Islamic caliphate starting in those countries. What they were used for, and conveniently so, was to fight off any type of Soviet military that was left anyway, to influence in those regions, because still the Soviet Union was still a power, but they were of course not the global power, because they spent so much regarding Afghanistan that these countries that were once part of the Soviet Union were now just independent states of their own. But with Pakistan, what's important is that they didn't want to become a part of the Soviet Union ever again. So that's why when you have these Islamic madrasas and mosques that were being built in countries like Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, it was in the hopes of having a sway over the Soviet Union's political regime, and it worked to the point. But it was a loss for most of these militants. They suffered a great casualty, but almost to the point where they won't be a threat. Also, back to Pakistan and back to the intelligence apparatus of the United States, and of course to the other Arab countries itself.
So what was the Western role in this of Britain and the United States? I know Britain was busy opening embassies in the new countries in Central Asia and looking to get deals for British petroleum and so on. Did they continue a policy of supporting Pakistan in supporting the Mujahideen as they had done in Afghanistan?
Well, I mean, we would have to start with the Nagorno-Karabakh War. This was basically an ethnic war between ethnic Armenians, and backed by the Republic of Armenia and the Republic of Azerbaijan. Mm-hmm. Now, Armenia and Azerbaijan were both, again, part of the Soviet Republic, but we're fighting for independence following the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, ethnic clashes between the two broke out shortly after the parliament, which was the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast. I'm saying now, I'm going to say the NKAO in short, in Azerbaijan, voted to unify the region with Armenia. Now, the UK had begun official political relations with Azerbaijan in '92, but they had long-standing relations starting back in, say, the 19th century. A cultural agreement between the two countries began in '94 when they finalized Azerbaijan's presidency under Haydar Aliyev. I'm saying that correctly. Azerbaijan was, however, rife with Salafist extremism, despite the ideological vacuum and the renowned interest in Islam, with the dissolution, of course, with the Soviet Union. Now, citizens of Azerbaijan, under the rule of Aliyev, supported nationalism over political Islam. The United States' own intelligence agency, however, saw fit to use the subdued Islamic sector to undermine the rising forces of Armenia with the backing of the United Kingdom, of course. Ethnic strife began to take a toll on both countries' populations, forcing most of the Armenians in Azerbaijan to flee to Armenia, and most of the Azerbaijanis in Armenia to Azerbaijan, while the human cost, by the way, began to rise exponentially. With Russia backing Armenia, of course, the US, UK, Western coalition forces backed the country of Azerbaijan and Heydar Aliyev. And Aliyev, by the way, was the president of Azerbaijan between 93 and 2003. But there were two coups involving Aliyev. The first involved the forced overthrow of Abu Fayyaz Akabay. I'm sorry if I'm saying his name incorrectly. He was the second president of Azerbaijan. From the years preceding 1993, Britain would begin opening embassies in Central Asia. And they were there only to promote British interests in the region. And Aliyev, who at this time was a part of the Soviet Politburo member and closely aligned with members of the British Parliament. But Akabay was under fire, however, because he won constituents. His constituents were suffering under economic duress, and the British knew this. And the country came under fire, and a rebellion had commenced under the distress. I mean, it was obvious. However, Aliyev had the backing of the British interests abroad and became the third president, as Akabay was forced to flee as the parliament was raided. There were reports that the UK and the US came out later that oil magnates such as BP were behind the coup, but they were basically quiet about it. And the placement of future pipelines in the quest for the Caspian Sea interest, which was the main underlying goal for the overthrow of these nationalist governments, right, was to gain the untapped oil reserves in the Caspian Sea, and BP was behind the effort. And reports later showed that this was true. Even though that there was evidence to support that the United States and the UK were behind the coup, British political and oil interests for the time being were disregarding even the reports, even to this day. And reports came out later. They were still denying the reports were ever true. But, I mean, it was obvious that you had numerous interests, especially when it comes to the fossil fuel industry, and to overthrow these nationalist governments, which by the way would never allow the complete domination of their countries. And that's why when they got rid of Echeverry and the countries itself, because he actually affiliated with himself with the Islamic ideal. He was very moderate, but the people had enough, and because the oil magnates such as BP they had enough, because the country was funding not for the people itself, but for these oil pipelines to run through. And Aliyev knew this, and he didn't care. But that was about it for Azerbaijan itself. And that was the reason. Look, that was the reason why. I mean, the Soviet Union knew this. I mean, and they knew it a long time coming. I mean, the political hierarchy of Russia knew this, and that's why when Zygmunt Brzezinski wrote the Grand Chessboard, he knew, and he saw 10 to 15 years online. He knew that these regions within that was under the power of the Soviet, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, and all those countries under the Soviet Union, where they were fighting for independence, that he said that the United States had to get involved behind the overthrow of these Soviet regimes that were still holding on, but and to just fund these nationalist governments headed by Aliyev, and to support them in the overthrow of the Soviet Union. And it worked. It worked, especially for Azerbaijan, and it worked with Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. But as you can see now, I mean, in the long run, that we had the growth of Islamic militancy, but Zygmunt Brzezinski, I mean, we spoke about this before, when he spoke to a reporter, he said what was more important, the overthrow of the Soviet regime or some hopped up Mujahideen fighters. But the long-standing fight now rests on the defeat, the total defeat, which is impossible, by the way, I think, of the defeat of the Salafist organizations. It will take decades to get rid of them all, even if it's possible, which I don't think so. Because the irony of this all is because of the United States still long-standing ties with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, who in turn takes the United States funding, use their military and their funding armaments, and support these madrasas and these Sunni-backed Salafist gangs and organizations that we're, on the other hand, fighting against. I mean, that's why this war on terror is just impossible. It's just an impossible war to win.
Thank you for listening, everyone. Next time, we'll be looking at the disintegration of Yugoslavia and Western powers' continuation of support for Islamic extremists within that conflict.